One game of cricket for $20 million. And it could all come down to one ball.
Hello and welcome to episode 41 of Radio Cricket. That's 41, the same number of times that Shahid Afridi has made a comeback to the Pakistan ODI team. I'm Nishant Joshi, full-time writer and part-time Virat Kohli lookalike. And I'm joined by the man who came out of his womb reciting Shakespeare. It kind of freaked everyone out. It was the darker bits of Othello. It is James Marsh.
Well, thank you, Nishant. Yeah, I'm not really sure how to come back to that, so I guess I'll have to look through my book of top 100 Othello comebacks. But anyway, how are you? What have you been up to this week?
Yes, well, James, I've been doing very well, thank you. And I'm doing even better after hearing the news of a very interesting occurrence in the world of diplomacy, because the first American person to meet North Korean Supreme Leader and part-time midget Kim Jong-Un wasn't in fact Barack Obama, it wasn't Hillary Clinton, it was retired NBA Hall of Famer and occasional crossdresser Dennis Rodman. Now, dear listeners, let that sentence just sink in for a second while you consider the odds of Dennis Rodman being the first American man to visit the world's second most brutal dictator. The first, of course, being the current BCCI president, Mr. Srinivasan. Apparently, Rodman was in North Korea as part of a documentary and was allowed in because our dear leader, or as we prefer to call him, the chubby Asian kid from the movie Up, is a huge fan of basketball. Now, James, I'm not so much into politics these days. I was a huge supporter of President Obama back in the day, but keeping quiet on all those pesky drone strikes really turned me into a Republican supporter. That is until I realised that their views on day-night tests were stuck in the past, and that they had major hang-ups about using a pink ball as well. North Korea has more gulags and death camps than most North Koreans have had hot dinners, which is, to be fair, not that many, but that's beside the point. Now, for the North Korean people, this all must have been a bit of a culture shock, a bit like Australian batsmen playing on the subcontinent. But what took the biscuit for me, James, is a question that Dennis Rodman received on arriving in the worst place on earth. One reporter quite optimistically asked him, "Is this your first time in North Korea?" To which Dennis Rodman should have replied, "No, actually, I've been here plenty of times. Didn't you see my episode of Cribs? It was filmed just outside Pyongyang, in Labour Camp 42, but I guess you must have missed it. It was late night on MTV, and you don't really get MTV in North Korea, except in Kim Jong-un's palace. Surprisingly big Justin Bieber fan." Australian Schadenfreude news now, and in what is a momentous occasion for everyone who indulges in Australian misery, by that I mean everyone who isn't an Australian, this week it was announced that Cricket Australia are trying to fast-track leg spinner Fawad Ahmed into the national side in time for the Ashes. What do you make of this development now, James?
He's someone who's allegedly suffered religious persecution, so he's moved over to Australia. He actually took 7 for 162 on his first-class debut down under. As you say, he's expressed hopes of playing in the Ashes. There is a clause in Australian law which allows athletes to be fast-tracked. I think that especially applies to any spin bowlers. But obviously we hope for Fawad's sake he won't end up following the footsteps of another Pakistani-born leg spinner who switched nations and ended up having a nightmare in Australia. Of course, I'm referring to Imran Tahir, who's still shaking in a dark room somewhere after his 0 for 260 world record worst ever figures in Adelaide last year. But I really do welcome this for a couple of reasons. Firstly, without wishing to invite angry letters from Daily Mail readers, I think it's a very charming story of how immigration and cricket can offer redemption and opportunity for someone after the horrors of unjustified persecution. Secondly, I think it's a really great opportunity to piss off Australian journalists who love pointing out that there may be 1 or 2 players in the England side who weren't actually born there. To be fair to the Aussies, a lot of them have been desperate to see yet another Pakistani-born potential Aussie superstar, the silky smooth Superfly Usman Khawaja, coming into the side, particularly after their performance in this series. But I would still find it quite ironic if these same journos had to spend the whole of the summer praising the performance of the Queensland left-hander and possibly Fawad Ahmed. Nishant, obviously Ahmed is 31. Do you think this is possibly a bit late to be nation switching?
Well, James, if we go by his Pakistani age, you do have to remember that Fawad Ahmed is probably about 48 years old. So once we take that into consideration, he still has a good 10, 15 years for Australia. Not many people have actually seen Fawad Ahmed bowl, and I feel that most of the hype in the media right now has been going on basically quite a lot of hearsay. And when a leg spinner does come in Australia ever since the Warren era, people do love to indulge in a bit of hyperbole. But Fawad Ahmed's first-class record really doesn't suggest that he's about to start knocking sides over. He does have just 31 wickets in 11 first-class matches over a number of years, although he has been getting a good rap from fellow cricketers in Shield cricket. For example, his Victorian captain, Cameron White, said that Fawad Ahmed is one of the best leg spinners that Australia has seen since Shane Warne, which, coming from a master leggy like Cameron White, is high praise indeed. And to be fair to White, he is actually entirely accurate in his appraisal of Ahmed, because since Shane Warne, Australia have used 4 leg spinners in tests. Stuart McGill took 10 wickets at an average of 65. White himself took 5 wickets at an average of 68. Bryce McGain had a single horror test against South Africa, in which he took no wickets. And then you have the man himself, the big daddy-o, Steve Smith. He's taken 3 wickets at 73, but everyone has a slow start to their test career, so give him a few hundred tests and he could reach that elusive 50-wicket mark. Mysterious West Indies donor news now, and West Indies cricket have a new sugar daddy, as a reclusive millionaire has come forward to invest in the newly formed Caribbean Premier League, which is slated to launch this July. The man behind the investment is Ajmal Khan, who owns a company called Venus Capital, through which he has made millions by investing in various companies. Now, James, I'm already getting an acute sense of cricketing déjà vu, as I'm sure the West Indies Cricket Board did when they were approached by this gentleman that nobody has ever heard of. And that's because for most cricket boards, especially in the wake of the Stanford debacle, when an unknown man offers you a briefcase of cash to control your 2020 tournament, the last thing you do is hand over the reins straight away, right?
Sure.
Wrong. The first thing you do when a shady millionaire comes into the equation is ask him, can we get that cash in $50 bills? Now, considering that the Alan Stanford debacle was just 4 short years ago, you'd have thought that the aftermath of it all would be fresh in the West Indies' minds, right?
You'd hope.
Well, you'd be completely and utterly wrong once again, because far from taking it slow and asking Venus Capital out on a few dates before they one night invite Venus back to their place, put on something silky, light some candles, and spend some alone time in a bathtub full of money, the West Indies Cricket Board did the cricketing equivalent of going to Las Vegas, getting shit-faced, then getting hitched in a wedding chapel by Reverend Elvis. And that's because instead of licking their wounds after a previous failed relationship, perhaps tentatively trying out some online dating before realizing that all businessmen on the internet are assholes just like they are in real life, the West Indies Cricket Board have dived in with a 20-year contract with Venus Capital. I hope our listeners will forgive me if I sound slightly cynical about all this. After all, I'm sure that the West Indies have learned from their previous lessons, and after all, everybody is allowed to make some mistakes. The current chief executive of the West Indies Cricket Board is Julian Hunt, and he put everyone's worries to rest by saying, I'm sure that Venus would not want to do anything that is outside of the contractual agreements that we have. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, Julian Hunt's plea for financial honesty revolves around Culture Club's seminal 1982 hit, Do You Really Want to Hurt Me? This is, of course, the same Julian Hunt who was chairman of the West Indies Cricket Board during the Stanford debacle, and the same Julian Hunt who has now been put in charge of the Caribbean Premier League. And Hunt went on to further reassure us all that they've done due diligence on Venus Capital, but when it comes to West Indies cricket and due diligence, the questions don't really involve asking to see tax forms and bank statements. There is only one correct question to ask, and that is, does this mean that we can get more cheerleaders in the corporate box? First ever competition time, and not too long ago we held a Twitter competition in which we gave you specific instructions to perform a series of life-threatening tasks, and a great big number of you performed these tasks with gusto, for which you will no doubt receive karma for in this divine life or the next. Or maybe your act will just dissolve into nothingness, and the universe might just, I don't know, forget that you followed us on social media once upon a time, implausible as that may sound. So, we have 6 copies of the official Ashes 2013 video game to give away, and here are the winners. James, if you kindly do the honours, the tension is killing me.
Okay, in no particular order, Nishant, the winners are... Joseph Ward, Charlie Burke, Denise McMullen, James Fern, John Kent, and Dan Stone. Congratulations, one and all. You must be happier than Ravi Ashwin seeing Phil Hughes put his pads on.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of Radio Cricket. Thank you very much once again for listening. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/altcricket. You can also download us from soundcloud.com/Radio Cricket or search for Radio Cricket on iTunes. Until next week, I've been Nishant Joshi.
And I've been James Marsh, and I leave you with the news that New Zealand seaman Doug Bracewell is out for the first test against England after sustaining a cut to his foot, allegedly whilst cleaning up following a house party. The exact circumstances remain unclear. It's fair to say that this is the first time since Shoaib Akhtar missed the 2009 World T20 tournament with genital warts that a player has been put out of action due to a nasty gash. Goodbye!
I think it was a very poor performance, one of the worst things I have ever seen done on a cricket field. Good night.